Hi friends, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, make sure to stick around, because we've got a great one today. In our last episode, Alexander was recovering from his illness. Having recovered from his near-fatal illness, Alexander resumed his march eastward in the autumn of 333 BCE, seeking a decisive confrontation with Darius III. But the Persian Great King, commanding a vast army, made a daring strategic move, outflanking Alexander and positioning his forces squarely across the Macedonian lines of communication. The chessboard was set for a climactic battle in the narrow confines of Issus, a battle neither king could afford to lose. Having recovered his strength after his severe illness at Tarsus, Alexander the Great was eager to resume his campaign and confront Darius III. In the autumn of 333 BCE, he led his army eastward from Tarsus, following the Cilician coastline. His immediate strategic objective was to pass through the series of narrow defiles and passes that led from Cilicia into Syria. Most notably, the Ammanic Gates, also known as the Syrian Gates or Bylon Pass. He dispatched Parmenion ahead with a portion of the army to secure these vital choke points. Alexander himself followed, subduing coastal towns like Malis and Kastabala along the way. Meanwhile, Darius III, at the head of his enormous imperial army, had advanced from his assembly point in Babylon westward into Syria. He established his main camp at Sochi, a wide, open plain that he believed would be an ideal battlefield, allowing him to deploy his superior numbers, especially his cavalry, to maximum advantage against Alexander's smaller force. Darius was confident that Alexander would have to come to him there, emerging from the mountain passes of the Amanus range. Alexander, having successfully passed through the Syrian gates, reached the coastal town of Myrandrus. His intelligence indicated that Darius was indeed waiting for him on the plains to the south and east. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to Alexander's plan. He would engage Darius on ground of his choosing after securing the passes. However, Darius was growing impatient. He had been waiting at Sochi for some time, and Alexander had not appeared as quickly as expected. Perhaps due to delays from Alexander's illness or the need to secure Cilicia. Some of Darius's courtiers and commanders, possibly underestimating Alexander or eager for a quick victory, may have persuaded the Great King that Alexander was hesitant or afraid to face the full might of the Persian Empire. Amyntas, the Macedonian exile and mercenary commander in Persian service, reportedly advised Darius to remain at Sochi, but his counsel was overridden by Persian nobles. In a fateful decision that would prove to be a catastrophic strategic blunder, Darius decided not to wait for Alexander any longer. Instead of holding his advantageous position on the broad plains, he resolved to move his massive army north, across the Amanus Mountains, through a different set of passes, possibly the Bok Pass or Pillar of Jonah route. Intending to descend into Cilicia at Issus, his aim was to get behind Alexander, cut his lines of communication and supply leading back through Cilicia and trap the Macedonian army against the sea, or force it to fight on ground of Darius's choosing. Darius's maneuver was audacious and, in terms of surprising Alexander, initially successful. He crossed the mountains with his vast host, a difficult logistical feat in itself, and emerged onto the coastal plain near Issus, north of where Alexander was currently located. Darius was now squarely in Alexander's rear. He captured the town of Issus and, in an act of brutality that would infuriate the Macedonians, he massacred or mutilated the sick and wounded soldiers Alexander had left behind there. At Myrandrus, Alexander was stunned to receive the news that Darius and the entire Persian army were now positioned between him and his base in Cilicia. At first, some of his officers were incredulous. Finding it hard to believe that Darius would abandon the spacious plains of Syria for the confined terrain of Cilicia, Alexander, however, quickly verified the intelligence. Far from panicking at being strategically outmaneuvered and cut off, Alexander reportedly saw this as a divine intervention in his favor. He is said to have exclaimed that the gods themselves were fighting on their side by delivering Darius into a battlefield that would nullify Persia's numerical superiority. The plain of Issus, where Darius had now positioned his army, was a narrow strip of land, barely a mile or two wide in places, hemmed in by the Gulf of Issus to the west and the steep slopes of the Amanus Mountains to the east. The Panaris River, possibly the modern Payas River, a small but significant stream with steep banks, flowed across this plain into the sea. This constricted terrain was entirely unsuited for the deployment of Darius's massive numbers, particularly his cavalry. It was, however, almost ideal for Alexander's smaller, more disciplined, and highly maneuverable army. With characteristic speed, Alexander turned his army around. He led his men on a forced march northwards, back through the Syrian gates which Parmenion still held, and towards Issus to confront Darius. The morale of the Macedonian troops was high. They were enraged by the Persian atrocities against their comrades at Issus, and confident in Alexander's leadership to turn this unexpected situation to their advantage. They understood that the narrow battlefield would favor their tactics. As Alexander approached the Panaris River, he began to deploy his army for battle. Darius, similarly, arrayed his vast forces on the northern bank of the Panaris, forced to deploy them in great depth rather than the wide frontage he would have preferred. The Great King, in his war chariot, took his traditional position in the center of his line, surrounded by his elite Persian infantry and Greek mercenaries. He was confident that his successful flanking maneuver and overwhelming numbers would deliver victory. The stage was set for the first direct confrontation between Alexander the Great and Darius III. The fate of empires hung in the balance on this narrow coastal plain. Darius believed he had trapped the young Macedonian lion. Alexander believed Darius had blundered into his killing ground. The eve of battle was thick with anticipation and the certainty of a bloody, decisive clash. Thanks for spending your time with me. Make sure to share this with a friend who'd enjoy it, and until next time, take care. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out and keeps you in the loop for all our future vlogs. We can't wait to share more fun adventures with you.